What is up, guys? Sunjutsu here, and today I have another versus video. Today I'm going to be versing Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings. And for this video I'm bringing back topics. For those of you guys who remember, they're all going to get 4 topics, and for each either Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, and for each topic I'm going to give the edge to either of those two, whoever I think wins the topic itself. And then in the end, I'm going to give you my own personal verdict on which one is the best. And for this, I'm only focusing on Game of Thrones through the seasons that we have up until now. Right now, we have the latest season. In the last episode, Khaleesi was heading to Westeros, so there's nothing after that. I'm not exactly 100% sure which season that is, but it's the last season. I believe either we're on season 7 or 6. I'm leaning towards 7. Again, Khaleesi is sailing to Westeros. That is the last episode, so that's what we're going to be at. That's going to be the limit. And with Lord of the Rings, I am only focusing on the 3 movies. Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. I am not going to be focusing on The Hobbit, although things that were introduced in The Hobbit can make it into the sort of the lore of Lord of the Rings a little bit, but I wanted to go ahead and pit those just in that timescape of those 2 things. Also, when it comes to I know Game of Thrones is a TV series. They have a longer time, a better amount of time to be able to give you more story. And Lord of the Rings is 3 movies, and that's a little bit different. Each format, I'm going to be these 4 categories, these 4 topics are mainly focusing on things that don't have to do with whether this is a TV show for the most part, and whether these are movies. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing we have is the world. Which world is better? And when I'm talking about the world, I'm talking about if you were, say, teleported into either of these worlds, and just say it's yourself. You can't choose to be, you can't choose to be really like a. I guess for Game of Thrones it would be like a noble or something, higher up. You can't choose to be like an elf or something in Lord of the Rings. You're just a regular person. I would assume maybe just like a peasant style person, depending on who you are. And so you're basically teleported into your equivalent into this world. So which world, in my opinion, is better? Sorry about that, guys. That's the chair. So in my opinion, the world that is better for me to live in, as opposed to the other one, is going to be Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has a much better world when it comes to which world you want to live in. Of course, in Game of Thrones, as of the beginning of the season, the beginning of the first season, the entire continent is at war, and Khaleesi is ravaging the other continent with her armies and her dragons. So yes, it is a bad time. But look what you have on the other side. On the other side, you have wild men and orcs, Mordor. You have the forces of evil bent on destroying everything in Middle Earth. So for me, it really came down to, would I rather wake up in the morning, go outside, and have, say, like an army of Lannisters outside my door, walking through to the next castle, trying to take that castle, or do I want to walk outside my door and see a bunch of orcs ravaging through the fields, killing just farmers, and then coming for me and killing me? Like, that's what it really came down to. Plus, with at least Game of Thrones, if I was plopped in there, I am a human for the most part. Most of the people inside Game of Thrones are human, unless you're like one of the giants or something like that. But then again, you're up north. Of course, every human's gonna be different. If you're from different clans, if you're like one of the wildlings, you're gonna be different. But for the most part, you're treated with the fact that you're human with your humanity, as opposed to Lord of the Rings, where depending on whether you're wood elf, you're a dwarf, you're a hobbit, you're basically treated completely different depending on whichever race is dealing with other races. So that's why I think the world in Game of Thrones is better. Now, battles. This one was an easy one. Yes, Game of Thrones had an amazing battle with the Battle of the Bastards. It was amazing. It was awesome. It was so much fun. Also, the Battle of the Wall. Those kind of things were fun. But for the most part, Game of Thrones hasn't really shown us too many epic battles in huge, large scales. It has shown us in the last season like what it can do, and in the future, it probably will have some really epic battles. but still, there is nothing that's going to compete with the Lord of the Rings style battles. There's really not much that can compete with it. Not even the Warcraft movie that came out recently. They're just they're almost, as the Lord of the Rings movies in the next 20 years, they're going to be known as classics. And so when it comes to those battles, you have to think of it in a classical sense. In the very beginning, you have a battle which looks like millions of soldiers of elven and men against orcs are fighting in. Minas Tirith, you have a similar scenario. You have different scenarios to the Helm's Deep, so that's why I want to go ahead and give this edge to the Lord of the Rings, because I feel like they had the much better battles, in my opinion. And the next thing is going to be characters. Which series has, or which thing has the best fantasy genre, has the best characters? And for this one, it was really hard. I would say one of the hardest decisions I had to make, because this one really focuses on one being a TV show and the other one being a movie. Now, 3 movies is a long time to get a lot of 3 movies, and they're 2 hours each, and then there's the director's cut that pushes them up to almost 3 hours each. Though, that's a lot of time that you can have when you can go ahead and kind of push some of the things that the characters are doing and some of the insights of the characters and pushing their character depth. Game of Thrones has seasons, each episode an hour long, so has a lot more time to push characters. And for one thing that we know, the characters in Game of Thrones are they have timelines, or time limits, I guess you would call it. They don't last very long, so you do get characters that they do die, but you get characters that don't die at the end, like Jon Snow, Daenerys. Those characters that lasted the whole way through and have huge character progression. So with this, I have to go ahead and give it to Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones gets a slight edge on this. Lord of the Rings had 3 movies to go ahead and push the characters along. Aragorn did a good job. He pushed him along. They made him, by the beginning of the movie, he was a strider. At the end, he was a king. We have Gandalf. Beginning, he was gray. At the end, he was white. We even have Gimli and Legolas. At the beginning of the movie, they hated each other. At the end of the movie, they loved each other. And the Hobbits. The Hobbits are, at the beginning, Frodo is just a happy-go-lucky hobbit, and at the end, he's basically like a freaking heroin addict type of hobbit. So, there is progression there, and they are really memorable characters, and they're good characters. They have some good charisma with them, but with the Game of Thrones, it just gets this edge because of how much time they've had with these characters. And even though the majority of the characters are dead, or long since dead, it still has a good amount of characters that are still alive that, they can hold a candle up to Lord of the Rings characters. Last but not least, and I'm gonna say it's gonna be Lord of the Rings for genre. It really is, and when genre, I mean fantasy. I'm pitting 2 fantasy. Let me go ahead and actually paint the picture for you guys. The reason I decided to pit these 2 guys together was because I felt they were very even. Okay, they were very even with their within the fantasy scope. There are, as you guys know, there are different fantasy settings that have much more extreme type of fantasy roles, such as Warcraft. The Warcraft movie that we saw, there was magic and everything everywhere. There was orcs. There were just all a bunch of crazy things all over the place. Then we have Warhammer. Warhammer has the same thing. It's just like the extreme. I felt Lord of the Rings, even though they do have orcs, they do have Uruk-hai, they have trolls, they have dwarves, elves, and stuff like that. It's a very fantasy. It's some would say the father of fantasy, the granddaddy of them all. They don't use magic all too often. They don't use huge, fantastical, powerful, crazy means really that's just overly magical. The tough part about pitting characters from Lord of the Rings against anything else besides Game of Thrones is the fact that everything else will completely, for the most part, would decimate most of those characters because of the fact how overpowered everything else is compared to Lord of the Rings. So I felt like Lord of the Rings was much more grounded. Same thing with Game of Thrones. Most of the characters are humans, and they're in like a medieval style setting. The most magical things that we do see are a couple things with some of the things up in the north. The White Walkers and dragons. For the most part, besides the Scarlet Witch, that's basically it. And it's a very, very light touches of magic, which I really, really do enjoy. I do like the huge, fantastical feeling of huge magical powers like Warcraft, the movie, kind of showed and portrayed. But I feel like when it comes to my fantasy style, I like it when it's like a touch of magic, a touch of things like that. So I know I went on a little rant there, but that's the reason I put these guys together, and that's the reason for fantasy I have to give it to Lord of the Rings. They're just the father of fantasy. They're the granddaddy of them all. Everything copied, for the most part, copied them, and so I want to go ahead and give it to them. And now we have my verdict. This is my own personal verdict, so do not crucify me in the comment section below, even though it is inevitable. But let me know in the comment section below which one you guys think is the best and why. And when it comes to the different topics, which you think Game of Thrones should have gotten one, you think Lord of the Rings should have gotten one. Let me know, guys. I'm going to go ahead and say that Game of Thrones is better than Lord of the Rings. It wins. And it's not a hands down win. It's slightly over win. And you might be thinking, Sunjutsu, that's not fair because Lord of the Rings hasn't had enough time to push a huge story and stuff like that. You never know. They might come out on Netflix with a Lord of the Rings style story, and I'm gonna have to put that all into the equation. But I mean, even though that's the reason, I try to shorten it up. If Game of Thrones was put into 3 movies, each one, I'll say director's cut 3 hours each, so about 9 hours of screen time. That's as much as essentially the first season, I believe. How many episodes the first season have of Game of Thrones? So, with that said, I'm thinking of how much story you can crunch up and put in there. And there are a lot of episodes that have a lot of different, a lot of things that just kind of waste time in Game of Thrones that they could really just get to the point. And so, by the third movie, if Game of Thrones was done in the Lord of the Rings fashion, I feel like by the third movie, we'd have this grand, huge battle with the White Walkers and Daenerys Targaryen and her Khaleesi's dragons and everything, and her armies. I feel like it would be fantastic. I feel like you could really do that story, cut a couple of the characters out. But even then, the reason that with that in mind, and that's putting them both on equal footing for the most part. And remember, I gotta bring down Game of Thrones into a more concise, because I chose that one. That if I had chose Lord of the Rings, I would have extended it and put it into a whole 7 seasons of Lord of the Rings, and you guys can tell me, and I can show you which one's better. But Game of Thrones, I believe, has a better overall cliff, almost like something that you anticipate. Something it has a better anticipation. It has a better thing that you're looking forward to at the end. So at the end of Lord of the Rings, you're looking forward to, yes, Frodo destroying the ring. Yes, the battle of Minas Tirith. The destruction of Mordor, and I would say that the very ending of Lord of the Rings, the last movie, the last battle, really was kind of disappointing. But so you're looking forward to that. And I know Game of Thrones is not finished, but with Game of Thrones, the very ending, what we have to look forward to is a tremendous battle between Daenerys Targaryen's forces against, along with the I forget the name of them, the clan that's like the sea clan, the Sea Raiders or whatever, with both of those forces combined, taking out the very, very, for the most part, really disliked kingdoms inside the Game of Thrones main continent that I'm blanking on right now. Let me look. Wow, duh. Alright, I looked it up. Sorry about that. Westeros is stupid. I don't know how I forgot. I just got a brain fart, but it's kind of late. Alright, so yeah. Okay, at the very end, you have Khaleesi with her forces taking out the very disliked kingdoms of Westeros and taking them out one by one, completely decimating them. And then we have winter coming at the same time, the White Walkers coming across the wall, and we have basically a climactic finish, which I'm assuming I haven't read the book, so I don't know what happens. I know the show has gone farther than the books at this point, but I don't really know what's going to happen at the end. But I'm assuming it's a climactic ending with the Targaryen's forces and their dragons against winter, and then Jon Snow is in the middle of it in some way. So that's the climactic finish that we have, and it's not because we have 7 seasons of footage and stuff to work with. Is the reason that I'm saying this because for me personally, that's the better ending. That's the better thing that we're building up to. Destroying the ring and finishing off Sauron. Yes, that is cool. That is interesting. I like that. that is actually, when I was a kid, when I was in my teens, I was watching Lord of the Rings as the movies came out, and I was like, yes, I want to watch the next one. This is amazing. This is awesome. Each one was better than the last one. But at the very end, yeah, it is a really cool finish. It is really interesting to see, but it's almost like good versus evil. While in Game of Thrones, it's not good versus evil. It's a collective good and bad versus what we can only assume is pure evil, but we don't really know. Like, that's kind of the difference of the two, and that's the reason I have to give it to Game of Thrones. Plus, some of the characters in Game of Thrones, like what's his face, Tyrion Lannister. We have Jon Snow still alive. We have a couple other characters that are still alive, that are still kicking it, that are just, I have so much more, I hate to say it, but charisma, like really in Lord of the Rings. Even though I loved all the characters, Gandalf had charisma. I don't know. Maybe Perry had charisma too. Legolas, sort of. Gimli probably pushed most of the jokes along, but in Game of Thrones we have so many more characters that have charisma. The world is much more grounded. Things like, there's no people really don't think that fantasy things really exist for the most part, so it's going to be a big surprise and a great huge finish in that third movie if once the White Walkers come, the dragons come, because people think those are gone for a long time. They think that those are gone, and so we have all these different things that lead up to, for me, choosing Game of Thrones over Lord of the Rings. It's just the grounded story and the perceived ending is why I have to give it the edge, and why I think that Game of Thrones is better than Lord of the Rings, ever so slightly. Anyway, guys, again, thanks so much for watching. If you watched all the way to the end, please hit that like button if you like what I'm saying, if you like this video. Even if you don't like who won, please hit that like, help me out. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button, subscribe to my channel. This is going to be Sanjetsu signing off. I know Game of Thrones is a TV series. They have a longer time, a better amount of time to be able to give you more story. And Lord of the Rings is three movies, and that's a little bit different. Each format, I'm going to be these four categories, these four topics are mainly focusing on things that don't have to do with whether this is a TV show for the most part, and whether these are movies. They're all going to get four topics, and for each either Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, and for each topic, I'm going to give the edge to either of those two, whoever I think wins the topic itself. And then in the end, I'm going to give you my own personal verdict on which one is the best. And for this, I'm only focusing on Game of Thrones through the seasons that we have up until now. Right now, we have the latest season. In the last episode, Khaleesi was heading to Westeros, so there's nothing after that. I'm not exactly 100% sure which season that is, but it's the last season. I believe either we're on season 7 or 6. I'm leaning towards 7. Again, Khaleesi is sailing to Westeros. That is the last episode, so that's what we're going to be at. That's going to be the limit. And with Lord of the Rings, I am only focusing on the 3 movies. Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. I am not going to be focusing on The Hobbit, although things that were introduced in The Hobbit can make it into the sort of the lore of Lord of the Rings a little bit, but I wanted to go ahead and pit those just in that timescape of those two things. Also, when it comes to what is up, guys? Sanjetsu here, and today I have another versus video. Today I'm going to be versing Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings. And for this video, I'm bringing back topics. For those of you guys who remember, each